So I want to talk about, you probably remember from, oh, sorry, I'm starting, but I don't know if you're ready. Are we ready? Okay. So from last week, you might remember that I ended up debating a guy who was boasting, oh, all the churches are closing, all the churches are empty, all the mosques are full. And we went backwards and forwards, me trying to get him to think rationally, and he was unable to do so. So I want to put to bed this argument once and for all, and I'm going to try and show you why I was pointing out to him it's about how many churches you have per capita. So I'm going to show you what I mean by that. So using information taken from, granted it is a little bit out of date, but it establishes the principle even if the numbers might now need to be refined. So using the English Church Census of 2005, here's what we found in that census. There are 16,247 Anglican churches with an average congregation of 54. There are 5,999 Methodist churches with an average congregation of 48. There are 3,656 Roman Catholic churches with an average congregation of 244. There are 2,386 Baptist churches with an average congregation of 107. There are 2,281 independent churches with an average congregation of 84. There are 2,227 Pentecostal churches with an average congregation of 129. There were 1,470 United Reformed churches with an average congregation of 48. There are 1,307 new churches with an average congregation of 140. There are 317 churches that are Orthodox with an average congregation of 81. And there's 1,611 churches of other descriptions with an average congregation of 63. Right, guys. That's from 2005. So taking those average numbers, what do we get when we add up the numbers of average congregants to the average churches? We get these numbers. Now, I can't remember, I'm just going to give you the numbers. Starts off with the Anglicans and it works through the Methodists, the United Reformed, the Roman Catholic, the Orthodox. But these are the numbers. So 877,338 Anglicans, 287,952 Methodists. At this point, I can't remember the order that I read them in from the list, so I'm just going to give the numbers. 892,064. Do you want to stick it on, bro? The next number, 255,302. 191,604. 287,283. 70,560, which I believe is probably the Orthodox there. 182,980. 25,677. No, that's the Orthodox. And then 101,493 of the average numbers of the average congregations split amongst them a number of different denominations, which gives us a total number of 3,172,253. Right? That's the number that we're talking about. Now you remember that Muslims keep saying, oh, your churches are empty, your churches are empty, your churches are empty. And I keep saying, yes, it's because we have too many churches. So now that I've established from the church survey how many churches we have, what's their average congregation, and I've totaled up all of the average congregations of each denomination and added all the average congregations together to give me a sum total I'm now going to take that sum total and divide it by how many mosques we have in the country, right? Now, depending on who you talk to, we have 4,000 mosques in this country. If we divide 3,172,253 people by 4,000 mosques, we end up with an average congregation of 793 people per church. You couldn't go into a church that has 793 people and say that the church is empty. So in other words, I am right and the Muslims are wrong. But that's not the only number, because there is no agreed upon figure for how many mosques there are. 4,000 is the higher number. Some say it's 3,400. So let's divide 3,172,253 people by 3,400 mosques. And you get an average congregation of 933 people per church. However, the official number of mosques that we have, i.e. the ones agreed on paper, is actually 1,400. So if we divide 3,172,253 Christians by the official number of mosques, which is 1,400, every single congregation would have 2,265 people inside of it. So Muslims, this lie that you tell yourselves is based on the lies of statistics. Because if we had the same number of churches that you do of mosques, every church would be full, just like every mosque is full. The reason why your mosques are full is because you have so few of them. The reason why our churches are empty is because we have so many of them. Now, ladies and gentlemen, now that I've debunked that silly, stupid argument that Muslims make here in the park, using official stats collected by actual research groups, now let me address the Christians. Which do you think as a congregation you can do more with? An average congregation of 48 or an average congregation of 900? How do you think you can do more in society and pack a bigger punch? By having more buildings and fewer people to maintain those buildings, or having fewer buildings and having more buildings having more people in each one of those buildings? Which way of organizing the church would help the church to have a bigger impact in our society? Let's be clear. The reason why so many congregations are struggling is because there's too few people trying to keep an expensive building open. If we sold our buildings and used that money to consolidate our communities into smaller geographical areas that worshipped in fewer buildings, there would be more Christians gathered together per capita, which would mean that those Christians would then be better organizing their resources, their time and their energies, and would be able to make a bigger impact on our society. You Christians always desire making a bigger impact, but you're not willing to reform your institutions in such a way to do so. So let me ask you this question, guys, Christians. Let me ask you a question, Christians, and then I'll take questions, guys. Don't worry, you'll get an opportunity. Which kind of church do you want to belong to? A church that has 128 people in it, or a church that has 2,265 people in it? I've shown you statistically and sociologically how you can have more churches, fewer churches, but with more Christians who are then able to do more. Establishing buildings has become an obsession amongst too many church leaders. Maintaining buildings has become an obsession. amongst too many church leaders. The order of the day for the Christian is not build another building. The order of the day for the Christian is consolidation, consolidation, consolidation. Consolidation of our buildings, consolidation of our projects and enterprises, consolidation of our community geographically. When we consolidate in those three ways, we will be able to make a bigger impact. Proof is in the pudding. Muslims are consolidated communities, and yet everyone feels that they get a bigger say in our society than we do. It's not strictly true, but it feels that way because we all recognize the state tiptoeing around the Muslims. Why does the state tiptoe around Muslims? Because your average mosque has thousands of people in it, and that is why the Muslims dominate a certain area. Churches can operate like that as well. That, combined with a better structure, a better organization. These aren't the only things that make the church weak, and I'm landing, so soon I'll be taking your questions. These aren't the only things that are making the church weak. So I'm going to list what else is making the church weak. And these are the kinds of conversations that we as Christians must be having with ourselves. And we must be militants about and activists about, is that we have visionless leadership that is uninspiring in the church, that cannot galvanize us or mobilize us to any particular cause. Our fellowships, weak and diminished as they are, despite their weaknesses, continue to act like silos, cut off from other fellowships around them, which means that they can't do better. We need to end that division. We need to aspire to better leadership. Too many Christians and too many Christian leaders accept the Enlightenment ideology. They accept too much of liberalism and think that it's Christianity. If you're trying to fight Christianity in the terms of liberal secularism, you're fighting with one foot in quicksand. We have to reject the Enlightenment and refashion ourselves and form ourselves entirely upon a Christian identity. The spirituality of the church is too effeminized. Too many of our congregations only emphasize the feminine values and feminine practices. There's nothing wrong with femininity in the church. 50% of the church should be female. But if you don't give space to a masculine spirituality, the men will not find a home in your churches. We also have poor evangelism. Too many Christians think that by standing on a street corner and shouting at people, that they have evangelized. And that if they shout hard and long about Jesus Christ dying on the cross and rising from the dead, that that's going to convince people. That's terrible evangelism. The world that we live in follows a religion of this world and of this life. And we must win the arguments about this world and this life from within a Christian identity before we can earn the right to talk about the Trinity or the crucifixion or the incarnation. And in my experience, when you win that argument, the liberal secularist will accept the doctrine without even arguing about it. And you don't need to shout at people to do good evangelism. It's got to be communicative, it's got to be dialogue, it's got to be relational, it's got to be conversational. So set up a stall and start talking to people. I'm nearly finishing. And finally, as I've already identified, we've organized our institutions in a way that actually makes them weak. What we need to do is organize our institutions in such a way as to make them strong. And that also includes allowing men to organize themselves in such a way as to become activists and defenders of the church. Okay, what's your question or comment?
Would you agree that Christianity kind of used to weaken some countries worldwide, like Africa, for example. You see what's going on in Niger. Most of the people there are Christians now. These are not the French-speaking African countries. Because they all become Christians, it seems like the people have kind of gone weak. Anything the West tell them, they do. Whereas when you look at the Muslim countries who hasn't adopted this Christian doctrine, the West can't penetrate their way.
So let me answer that point. It's entirely wrong. I'll give you an example. Poland and Hungary are rejecting the Western way and they are Christian. Slovakia is rejecting the Western way and they are Christian. Russia is rejecting the Western way and they are Christian. Uganda is rejecting the Western way and they are Christian. Kenya is rejecting the Western way and they are Christian. So the reality is, I'm replying to your point. So the reality is that Christianity, it isn't that Christianity makes you weak. It is the absence of following Christianity that makes you weak. So insofar as a society, whatever it may be, whichever country you point to as your example, insofar as they don't practice Christianity, but they do practice liberalism, they are going to be weak to Western penetration because the West is liberal. And if you adopt Western liberal values, you're going to not be able to resist Western penetration. But as Poland and Hungary and Uganda demonstrate, that the more you adopt Christian values, the more you can reject the Western way of doing things. So your thesis is based on faulty information and it doesn't have enough data points for it to be true. When you look at other data points outside of the scope that you're thinking, you actually identify that the real question is not whether you're adopting Christianity. The real question is, how much Christianity are you adopting? The more Christianity you adopt, the more of Western way of life, liberalism you reject. The less Christianity you adopt, the more Western liberalism pushes in.
So would you say the UK is not really a Christian country? We call it Christian country, but
right. So I'll address that point. So the answer to your question is yes, the UK is not a Christian country. But also I want to point out some other information, some other data points to you. The fact is, Islam is not immune from liberalization. Tunisia has liberalized. Like, I know Muslims who come from Tunisia, they're saying that it's not a Muslim country anymore. Morocco has liberalized. I know Muslims that are saying Morocco is not a Muslim country anymore. Saudi Arabia is liberalizing. Like, the reality is Islam requires a caliphate. No Muslim state, apart from Afghanistan, wants a caliphate. North Sudan, quite recently rejected Sharia law and said, we're giving up on Sharia law as the basis of our legal system. So the reality is, bro, that the narrative that the Muslims spin is a false one. That actually Muslim societies are being penetrated by liberalism as we speak. Okay, look at Dubai, another example. Any other questions or comments? Yeah, you had a heckle, now what's your question?
I forgot actually. Me, yeah. Actually, basically.
So what's your question?
Yeah, no, I don't have question, but you talk about Christianity. I was talking with him, Christianity is finished actually. All the shelves are empty. There is nobody.
There you go. So literally, the idiot who was stood here, who didn't bother to listen to the entire presentation, has just repeated the claim that all the churches are empty, and I just demonstrated that if the Christian community had the same number of mosques, every single church would have 2,200 people inside of it. The problem for the Christians is not that there aren't a lot of Christians. The problem for the Christians is we're too spread out. And what we need to do is to consolidate. You know the next time you want to ask a question, bro, it would do you well to actually listen to what was presented before you talk, because now you look like a total plonker.
Exactly.
Any other questions?
Can I say something?
No, I want to take questions or comments. Right, go on. What's your question? What's your question? What's your question?
Okay, I didn't hear all what you said, what the gist of it.
Yeah.
For the sake of what Jesus said, he said, I will build my church and nothing shall stop it. Nothing.
Yeah.
Islam,
Yeah.
the world,
Yeah.
nothing.
Yeah.
Satan.
Right. So let me address that point. Because, brother, with the greatest of respect, what you're doing is something that lots of Christians do. I agree with the theological principle that nothing is going to stop the church. I say that all the time. But that doesn't mean that we can't think about how we do things. And how we do things is based upon using wisdom and pragmatism. And so if we're finding that one way of organizing our church structures is making us weak, we don't need to say that because Jesus promised that the church could never be stopped, that therefore we don't have to, or we can't do anything different. If we know that something's not working, let's change it. And the way that we're organizing churches is not working. Yeah? Guys, can I ask a favor? Since you're not interested in what I'm doing, could you go and have your talk somewhere else? Right, well, get involved in what I'm doing. No, you want to talk to them. Right, well, talk to me, bro.
I did, but you cut me. You said no.
Yeah, because you wanted to talk to them. Go on, what's your question? I'm doing questions and comments.
Something you
I
responded
know,
to.
I'm Jesus follower.
What?
I'm
Yeah.
born in Jesus.
Thanks be to God. Okay. Any other question? Go on, bro.
It's a more of a statement. A packed church or a packed mosque don't determine whether the people are following that religion. So although you see empty churches, you might see packed mosques, it doesn't mean everyone's really authentic
Yeah,
Muslims.
so let me bounce on that. Because this is a really good point. And it also is another destroyer of Silly Boy's argument over there. Right? Remember the plonker who said your churches are empty? Well, empty churches and full mosques actually have no bearing at all about what is true. During the communist period, the communists could pack stadiums with thousands and tens of thousands of people. Does that mean communism's true? The Nazis during the Nazi period could fill huge stadiums full of thousands of people. Does that mean Nazism's true? So the reality is that the number of people that go inside a building has no bearing at all about what is true. But the point that I'm making, I'm not trying to say if we've got full churches it proves Christianity true. I'm trying to point out to us that there is a way that we can make ourselves stronger. And it is about consolidation. Consolidation of our buildings, consolidations of our projects and enterprises, and consolidation of our resources. And when we consolidate, the church will be stronger. But the problem with the church is we have too many leaders who each want to be their own pope and each want to have their own building. And then what they do is they spread the church out more and more and more. And then they want to silo the church in such a way as that their little congregation only does its little congregational things. That is what is killing the church. We need to break down the barriers that divide us. We need to find ways to work together. We're not going to agree about everything, so let's unite on causes as opposed to trying to unite on doctrinal statements. Any other questions? Now, bro, if you want to ask a question or make a statement, this is your opportunity. Don't interrupt me or I'll just not take any questions from you. Would you like to say something now? Okay, go on, yeah.
I agree with a lot of what you said. I'm a Christian, okay, so I have no problem with this. My question to you would be, is there not an argument, and I get what you said about consolidation, I'm a pastor,
Yeah.
anyway, and I get what you said about working together, I'm a pastor,
Yeah.
I believe that. But is there not an argument here to say, actually, things are not going to get better through consolidation, that's going to get worse over time? in the sense there's a theological argument that says this world is ending, it's getting worse,
Yep.
it'll go to decline,
Yep.
and Christians will become marginalised. So how do you then counter that argument? Because I think that's really quite key within the churches.
Great.
I think the other aspect of that is about truth, and consolidation needs to be around truth. I do not want to consolidate with people who are, I believe, to be out-and-out heretics and liars. I really don't want to do that because in the sense of having people leaders who don't believe what they say, who, if they do believe what they say, it's not the gospel. So
so let me reply to that. So the brother is right. This is the instinctive default go-to way of thinking about things, and particularly of pastors, because obviously as pastors they're trained in theology. So their instinct is whenever they're confronted by data and information, they try to think about it theologically. So my counter to your position is in two ways. Firstly, not every question needs a theological answer. The argument that I'm making is a sociological one. Christians are too spread out in too many buildings, and that is what dilutes their influence, power and authority in society. It's what dilutes their evangelism. It's what dilutes their ability to do good works and have a meaningful, transformative impact in the world around them. So the way to deal with that, since the problem is sociological, is with a sociological answer, which is about consolidation. Now I'm going to address all the points that you've made. The second, and then I'll come to you, the second point that I would make is that I actually disagree with your theological assertion that the Bible lays out one course for the future in which things get worse. I do agree that that narrative is there and it is biblical. But actually, in my reading of Scripture, there's two possibilities. One in which the church does terrible at the Great Commission, everything goes to shit, then our Lord returns and conquers the world. But there's another future that you could also see in Scripture in which the church does well at its commission and Christ returns not needing to conquer, but returns to a world that is already largely conquered for him, and he just mops up the rest.
So this would be pretty much millennials.
Yeah. And my final point is this. Of course, truth is a point around which we should unify. But my argument to those who make that argument is that I think that they are too broad in trying to be too narrow about the truth. They try to pin down every little last thing. And that's why Protestant churches fragment at the drop of a hat, because they fall out about this tiny thing or that tiny thing. The reality is there are certain core issues that decide whether you're a Christian or not, and we should unite around those, but everything else we should deal with in charity, and for the sake of the gains that we should make, the unity is an essential part of the truth. The unity outweighs uniting with people with whom we might disagree with on secondary, tertiary, or other non-core issues. So that would be how I would address that argument. Thank you very much, Pastor. Let me go on. You had a point?
Okay, I'm afraid I can't agree with you where you say that all the churches should unite and join together. It's like putting one bad apple amongst a load of good apples. Say, for example, one bad apple will contaminate all the other apples. So, let's quickly go. When it was the church as one, there were 5 popes around the provinces. There were 5 popes. First among
You're essentially making the Orthodox argument. You're saying that the Orthodox Church is true.
Let me done it.
Yeah, please come to a question. Yeah, go on.
Because it winds me up this. So, then there were first among.
Bro, I've got a degree in religious studies. You don't need to teach me the history. I know the history of the Orthodox Church. That's fine. What's your question, please?
People that are listening, and I want them to. There's not a question. I'm just taking my point because I disagree.
Okay, so you're saying that the Orthodox Church is the historical church.
And you won't let me speak. Do you want to let me speak?
Yeah, but
I
please.
won't be less than 1 minute.
Deal. Go for it.
So these 5 popes in their regions that were first amongst equals. There's no one pope above the other. So 1054, the Roman Church in Rome, the Pope wanted to introduce the new thing.
he wanted to be head of all the churches.
So you know what was before the Roman Church?
So then
Go on, make.
they introduced the Philoque, they introduced many things. So they had to separate. Otherwise you're going to contaminate the original one church.
You're talking about the schism.
So then what happened?
Okay, I get the history, bro.
So yeah, we said 1 minute, I've still got 35 seconds left.
No, you haven't. You've used a minute.
No, so then you've got the Protestants like Calvin and Lutheran attacking the Protestants.
Okay, so let me address.
Attacking that,
So let me address that
not
argument.
coming back home to the original church.
Let me address
You
that
threw
argument.
The baby out with the bathwater.
Let me address the argument. So,
Come back to
so
the
let me
original
address the
church
argument.
and not contaminate
So let me
everyone.
address the argument. So let me address the argument. The argument is essentially the Orthodox Church is the true church. Everyone should come back to the Orthodox Church. Right. I fully accept that I can't convince hardline Orthodox to unite with others that aren't Orthodox. And I fully accept that I can't convince hardline Roman Catholics to unite with others that aren't Roman Catholic. And same with Presbyterians and same with evangelicals. So I say to you people, great, fine. You don't want to unite with other Christians. You can still take what I've said about consolidation and just apply it to your own church. So in other words, if you want an Orthodox colony, do it, because an Orthodox colony would still be a stronger, more potent Orthodox church than an Orthodox church that's scattered around the country. Same with the Presbyterians, same with the Evangelicals, same with the Roman Catholics. If you're a hardline sectarian and you think to yourself, well, I don't want to unite with those other Christians, fine, great, run with where you are, but my argument still stands. You just apply it to yourselves, because the reality is that a consolidated Orthodox church in one geographical area with fewer buildings but more people in each building will still be a stronger Orthodox church than an Orthodox church that's spread out over everywhere. So there you go. Go on. He beat you by a second. Go on.
You mentioned like the polarisation, and he said you believe that you can't be one church. Do you think that the Apostles' Creed is like a fundamental basis to that, and everyone that has that as their root cause could be the ones that are accepted as the united church?
Yes, so the Apostles' Creed is definitely one of the symbols, one of the totems upon which Christians can unite. But I would offer the Nicene-Constantinopolitan Creed as a better creed of unity, because the Apostolic Creed, whilst it is a valid creed, it doesn't go into enough detail, whereas the Nicene-Constantinopolitan Creed does.
I'll do two things at the same time. The schism happened before the Roman Church was fully founded. You do know that, don't you? By the Greeks, who originally changed the...
If you guys are going to have a debate...
No. I'm doing yours, and also...
So ask me a question, bro, because the thing is, he's just going to want to respond to you. I'm not having a...
No, I'm just saying...
Ask me a question.
You're a priest, did you say?
He's a pastor.
Pastor, yeah. To get more people in the church, it's not about the church, it's about getting more younger white males into it, because there's a lot of broken young white males who, and also social on TV and adverts and movies.
So,
and
can I... Okay.
No, let me finish. It's not the church's fault, it's just the TV is just terrible these days. There's so much filth on TV, music videos, and they're socially bound to all these pressures they have because, you know, bad TV.
Okay,
like for example,
so wait, I don't need an example. I get your argument.
to get more people into the church, you need to start the young males first to get them.
Okay, so 90% of the people that tune in to watch my videos are all men. Look around you. Who's listening to me? Men. Now look at how many young people are listening to me. This in some ways is actually kind of... Uncle. Like, no, let me finish, bro. The reality is that the kind of muscular Christianity that I teach, the kind of muscular Christianity that I stand for, the kind of muscular Christianity that I proselytize, let me deal with your point. It is speaking to young men, and it is speaking to men generally. The reason why men are missing from the church is because we've created a church that is too feminine, where masculine energy can't find a home, and where we don't cultivate brotherhood amongst men. And what we need to do is cultivate a more muscular spirituality in which men are encouraged to have brotherhood amongst themselves, and that masculine energy can find a home, and that means things like teaching men that there's a good side and a bad side, there are good guys and bad guys, and we're the good sides and we're going to go against the bad guys, and giving them a sense of competition, calling them to rise up to responsibility, to take on the mantle of responsibility, teaching them about virtue and truth, because men respond to a challenge. So we offer them challenges for them to rise to. And when we teach that kind of spirituality, and when we allow that kind of spirituality to give birth to things, men will begin to find homes in churches. That's why, as a religious studies student, I can tell you that the churches that, for instance, do evangelism a lot as a big part of their religious life, or are very clear about making very clear commitments that are expected by congregations, those churches have more men inside them. That's not my problem. That is not my problem.
Church is a church.
That's not my problem. You need to maybe read a dictionary. Go on, bro.
I mean, if we look at the early church,
Yeah.
when the Roman Empire were killing Christians just because they were Christians.
They were still Hebrews
Yeah.
back then, you know.
Hold on.
Yeah.
They were all,
Yeah. No, don't let him capture your question.
the
Ask
early
your
church
question.
was all Jewish.
That's correct, yeah.
Anyway, so the early church grew, even though the Roman Empire, well, most of the emperors were against it, and it was a crime of execution.
They used them to make power.
Anyway, but it couldn't stop it. Half the Roman Empire by the 4th century were Christian.
Yeah.
That's why they changed it. They changed
Despite the persecution. But what I'm saying is that, do you think the church today would benefit from following Paul's teachings in his letter to the Corinthians regarding men in the church?
Yes. So to answer your question, of course, as a Christian, I'm going to affirm the idea that the church should follow Paul's teaching. Like, of course they should. But I need to correct some of your history, right? Correction number one is that if you actually read the book of Acts, yes, the church was more born amongst the Jews, but the first church almost immediately became Gentile as well. There were Gentiles in the church. Yes. So the Gentiles also entered into the church. I'm answering his question, not your comment. Wait your turn, right? So that's the first correction. Second correction is it wasn't the case that all the emperors persecuted the church. Actually, Roman persecution of the church was sporadic, inconsistent, and diverse in terms of where it happened geographically and to what potency it happened. Some of the worst persecutors were Diocletian, for instance. He was one of the worst. However, Nero, when he persecuted the church, he only persecuted the church in Rome. Christians in Carthage weren't being persecuted at the time of Nero. So the point is, Christians have created a romanticized sense of their own history, and we're drawing the wrong lessons from that romanticized sense of our own history. We need to draw the right lessons from the right history. So let me explain one of the reasons why the church successfully converted the Roman Empire.
That's the other way around.
The reason why it did so was because in a world where there was no welfare, there was no social security system, the church organized itself so well to look after its own people that it was then able, through that organization, to look after everyone else's people. And when it did that, everybody wanted to be a part of the church. And that's how the church grew in Rome. So likewise, the church today should organize itself in such a way that we are properly looking after the needs of our own people. And when we are looking after the needs of our own people in this society, which are similar needs to everyone else, eventually the church will earn the reputation that if you want this need addressed, where do you go? You go to the church. That's how we win. Right, any other questions? Pastor first, is older than you, then you.
I'll take you first, right?
All right, go on.
Okay, so when I was in Israel a couple of years ago, which was lovely, I mentioned to my dad about how it says in the Bible that there is 1 Timothy 2:5, and it mentions there is one mediator between man God.
Yeah.
And then it says that is Jesus Christ, and I told him that. So we shouldn't be accepting Mary as a mediator between the two. But he said,
Yeah.
no, I like praying to Mary. Do you know if anyone I can convince him that Mary isn't someone that is a mediator?
Right. So let's get this clear, right? The Bible is true. Jesus Christ is the one mediator between man and God, right? That's very clear. But the problem is, bro, you got to listen to the question.
Sorry.
The problem is, bro, that both you and your father have made the same mistake. I'm not a Roman Catholic, but the Roman Catholic Church doesn't teach that Mary is a mediator between man and God in the way Jesus is. The Roman Catholic Church teaches that Mary offers her prayers to Jesus, and Jesus alone offers his prayers to the Father. So both you and your father don't actually understand what the Catechism teaches. Mary is no more a mediator to God than you are if I ask you to pray for me. You don't pray to me in the same way that Jesus does before the Father. You offer your prayers up to the Father through Jesus, and that is exactly what Mary does. So both you and your father have made the same mistake and should actually bother to read the Catechism before you debate it. Any other questions, ladies and gentlemen? Pastor, yeah.
I did have one, no problem. Just quickly, is it not the point? I mean, I understand what you said about the need for consolidation and coming together. I've yet to see churches where they come together and thrive. I mean, what I've seen is churches come together and actually over time sort of split for various reasons about sort of kind of conflicts over many different things. So I'm not always sure unless you actually change the heart of the people in terms of mission. One of the things that's actually missing maybe is that life-changing transformation encounter with Jesus Christ. In some ways, we've actually put Jesus out of the church. We've become almost kind of Christianity light. And if you actually sort of think about it, then is it not time to actually put Jesus back at the centre and his life, his mission, his power, all those kind of central gospel things to actually change people's lives?
Yep.
At the same time as you try to consolidate and all the rest of it.
Yep.
The consolidation along really kind of doesn't really fit in, I think.
Yeah. So in answer to your question, statistical evidence shows that when churches unite, it prolongs their life, right? The reality is that uniting churches do become stronger. That's why lots of liberal churches that are all dying manage to keep themselves plodding along because they unite and they give themselves another 50 years through the unification. Well, how about we do that from a position of strength rather than waiting till we're so broken that we then unite? Because the reality is when we unite, we do better. But you're right, it's got to be unity based upon Jesus, with Jesus at the centre. I mean, for me, that goes with that question. But the reality is that the thing that causes churches to split, and it's a particular ailment of the Reformed churches, is they try to define every dogma and doctrine too narrowly. And they don't actually understand that part of what it means to be a Christian is to greet your brother with charity, remembering that love covers a multitude of sins. And so that even if your brother has the wrong idea on some secondary or tertiary issue, you don't need to start a new church. You just need, even if you can't agree, you live together in love. And that's what's missing from Protestant churches. That's why they fragment. But my arguments are totally sound. They're empirical. They are backed up by evidence. And the reality is, with respect, Pastor, it's the leadership of the church and the need for each pastor to think, well, I need my own building and my own congregation.
You don't know he's a pastor?
No, I'm not. I'm speaking generically of pastors. Rather than saying, why don't we have 10, 15 pastors all working together, running a church of 2,000 people? And working as a team. Lots of pastors balk at that idea because they're no longer the top dog. They're just one of 20 working in a council. And actually, I think that is a better way of doing it. Any other questions or comments? Go on, bro.
Okay, so basically, I asked Lamin earlier if he has a question.
The laminator.
And he said that, Bob, that you're a coward, that you'd run from it. Is this true?
Right. So the reason why I don't debate Lamin is because he I find him to be a bit of a troll, and he owes me about £1,000. And because he owes me £1,000, until he pays up, I'm not going to do it. Because we made a verbal agreement that if I debated him on 2 occasions, he would pay me for the debate. Right? And for answering a question. And I answered the question, and I debated him, and he refused to pay. So he's not a man of his word, and for that reason, I have no interest in giving him time. Yeah. If he asked me a question here, yes. But the problem is, bro, he will use that as an opportunity to try and hijack. Yeah.
His question anyway was in where Jesus said...
Yes, you're right, bro. Thank you very much. There's my witness. A witness who saw it. Anyway, guys, let's not let Lamin try to hijack this. Any other questions or comments? Any other questions or comments? You've asked a question. Any other questions or comments, guys? I'm a Christian. I'm doing a Q&A on Christianity. So it's any questions, any comments about Christianity, and then I respond to them. You've asked a question. Let someone else ask a question. Any other questions, ladies and gentlemen? Go on, bro. Right. So the reason why Jesus had to be sacrificed, specifically to that question, why do Christians believe that Jesus sacrificed himself? And it's really important that we make that distinction. We're not saying someone else sacrificed Jesus. We're saying Jesus sacrificed himself in the same way that we might say a Marine sacrifices himself when he jumps on a grenade to save the rest of his platoon. That's more analogous to what Christians are saying when we say Jesus sacrificed. But why? The reason is that God created us, and because God created us, we owe God one holy life. Right, guys, I'm going to move the whole conversation 10 paces that way. Please come and join me.
Yeah, sure. Can I ask the question now, Bob?
No, I'm dealing with this guy's question, and then that lady's, and then you.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, peace with you, bro. Yeah, I've got a card. So in answer to the question, who asked the question? So why do Christians, we owe God one holy life because God created us, right? No one has ever paid God what they owe him. So Christ comes and he pays that debt. He offers that one holy life that we all owe. But because he is not just a human being, he's a divine human being, his one holy life is equal to all of our lives. And so he pays the debt for everyone that accepts it. But more than that, because we haven't paid God the debt that we owe him, we suffer under a curse. And that curse must be paid, which is death. And so Christ takes the penalty of sin, he takes that death upon himself, and by conquering that death, he then conquers death itself, so that we who are in Christ might have life and share in his life. There you go. And the lady walked off. This is the point with modern people. No patience. Go on, bro. No, I said you, and I said lady, and then you. Go on.
Okay, so he's not here right now, so he's not going to hijack it if you try answer. I'm only asking this because actually it was an interesting point. It's about how he told me to ask you that. Why does Jesus say he's I think a servant in Acts 13:3, or the Lord's servant might not be. Well, but it's something to do with him being a servant. Do you know?
Yes, of course. And brother, I want to encourage you to download the SoCo app.
Oh, I have it.
Right, download the SoCo app. And then when he quotes a verse, see if it's in the SoCo app and read it. Because I answer all of these questions. But basically the answer to the question is this, right? Christians believe that Christ took the form of a servant. So obviously if Christ takes the form of a servant, then the Bible is going to describe himself as a servant. Nothing about Christ being a servant contradicts the idea that Jesus is divine. Because the Trinity is that there is one God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and the Son takes the form of a servant to the Father. So that doesn't contradict our belief. Muslims are just so bloody ignorant that they've never bothered to read a book because they're arrogant, that they can't even phrase a sensible question about Christianity. Their lack of education is not our problem. Their lack of education is their problem. So you simply need to point out to them what we believe and simply say to them, unless you can ask a question about what I actually believe, then, you know, you're not even talking to me. You're talking to a straw man Christianity. Any other questions or comments? Yes, go on, bro.
It's going back to your comment about the church, and I agree. You know, there's too many differences amongst believers. But I read recently about the church in Philadelphia,
Yeah.
which is in the Book of Revelation.
Yeah.
Can you read it out?
Yes, please.
So this is what it says. And to the angel of the church in Philadelphia, write these things. Saith he that is holy, he that is true, he that hath the key of David, he that openeth and no man shutteth, and shutteth that no man openeth. I know thy works, behold, I have set before thee an open door, and no man can shut it. For thou hast little strength. He's talking about the church now.
Yep.
Thou hast little strength, and hast kept my word, and hast not denied my name.
Yeah.
And then later on, he goes on to say that he loves this church.
Yeah, this is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. By the way, when you hear the scriptures being read, like, you should thank God. Every time you hear the scripture being read, thank God. You know? So when you hear it in a congregation, which, brothers and sisters, right now this is a congregation, it's an informal congregation. So we just heard the word of the Lord being read. So to which at the end of the reading we should say thanks be to God. Because if we're not grateful to be able to hear the word of the Lord, when are we going to be grateful? So, okay, so do you want me to bounce off that verse, or have you got a question?
It's an interesting thing, because this is the church that God loved.
Yes.
Jesus loved.
Yes.
And they were of little strength.
Yes.
Now, I wonder what you think about.
Yeah. Okay. So, but what does it mean when when our Lord said to the church in Philadelphia, that it was of little strength? Well, it's obvious. They were of little sociological strength. They were of little political consequence. They were a tiny, tiny little congregation in an ocean of paganism in the middle of the Roman Empire. But the reality is, for us as Christians, God does not love us any less because we are small in number or great in number. The reality is, remember, that tiny church in Philippi that was of no great particular strength helped to conquer the Roman Empire, which means that our fellowships, no matter how weak they are, can once again conquer the liberal Western world. But the point is, and this actually backs up my argument, is that the church in Philippi was so small that when it says that there was a church in Philippi, it literally meant that there was a church in Philippi. In other words, they were consolidated geographically, they were consolidated sociologically, they were consolidated institutionally. And that is the way that we Christians gain the initiative again. We consolidate our institutions, consolidate our projects and enterprises, and we consolidate our resources by having fewer buildings and more people in them, more Christians living together, so that we dominate the local area, so that it's our children going to the school, so that it's our parents sitting on the school governing board deciding what is and is not taught in the school, that it's our men who are being recruited to the local police force, so that they are governing what is and is not permitted according to the law, that it's we make up the majority of the consumers, deciding which businesses get boycotted and which businesses get started and supported. When we consolidate, we regain the initiative. So actually the Bible verse supports me.